All right. Episode 7 of another hip hop podcast. This is Mayron. You'll find out more about me as the podcast goes on, specifically in this episode, I think. And I'm here with.
This is Bria, the curator, here to bring you the things. I'm going to come up with like a cooler name or something.
Bria's a cool name.
Is it?
I mean, I guess. It's not like an uncool name.
Hey. Well, I'm here. Thanks for coming back, guys.
I mean, you have a whole interlude about you.
Yo, okay. I'm not even going to hold you. Like 2 or 3 niggas have sent me videos of themselves singing Bria's interludes since the whole resurgence of So Far Gone. And I'm not going to lie, I enjoyed it.
Did you?
I did.
Like in a funny way?
Yeah.
Okay.
More funny than anything. But I was like, wow, this didn't happen the first go round. I'm not mad. Keep it going. Shout out.
Are you asking people to send you videos of
I wasn't before, but no, these are quite entertaining. So if it needs to continue, I'm not going to be upset with it.
I mean, I guess if you need to shoot your shot, that's how you shoot your shot.
I was like, is this... Anyway.
Anyways.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, seriously. Yikes. So, shifting gears a lot. Like,
right.
Real fast.
Actually.
Hip-hop has these, like, interesting conversations with themselves, right? It's sometimes, like, the past talks to the future, and the future talks to the past, and it happens unintentionally. And it happens a lot in certain aspects of hip-hop. It happens a lot in certain narratives that the way we talk about hip-hop. One of the big things is death. I think today, what I want to talk about is hip-hop and its relationship to death. So Jay once said, y'all respect the one who got shot. I respect the shooter. And then Kendrick Lamar says back, years later on Good Kid, Mad City, everybody gonna respect the shooter, but the one in front of the gun lives forever. And it's very telling of the way like hip hop has treated its dead, right? We honor them, we glorify them, and just like all other art forms, hip hop has a very complicated relationship with death. I mean, all art, right? All art is about death at some level. I mean, would you disagree or?
No, I completely agree. And I just think the idea of mortality in the artist's mentality is something that's like really important to the artist and to the consumer. And I mean, the discussion of how art is treated once the artist dies is a whole nother conversation. So yeah, for sure.
It's wild, right? Because like kind of like basically what you said is that like the mortality aspect of it is what gives art its weight, right? Like the fact that we are temporary and the fact that art can make us live forever, the fact that we are temporary and that's what gives our emotion weight, and emotion is the lifeblood to art, just inextricably ties art and death really, really close. And even within all this, even with the whole idea of art and death, like hip hop is special, right? Because hip hop comes from a place where it's simultaneously like glorifies death and like laments it constantly. Throughout like hip hop's past, it's always thought about as artists that they're most open when they're talking about death, and whenever they're towards the end, or whenever we think about their towards the end, we bring up the lyrics that like they said about their own deaths. A lot of ways hip hop like self-prophesizes things. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Like there's some like logical, practical reasons, right? Like the fact that hip hop is like the art of survivors. The art of those that live death around them. And the art of those that found the most meaning in the most death-lit, death-stricken places and turned these places and the people living them into something gorgeous, right? Like you coming out the Bronx, it's on fire, and you're rapping, and you can see death and destruction all around you. So your relationship to death changes, and that will affect the way you sort of give your art to people.
Right. Or like 50 Cent, somebody who like basically stared death in the face, almost died, and that's kind of what inspired him, I think, more so to become an artist.
100%, right?
Yeah.
You got shot 9 times, you're like, man, I shouldn't sell drugs anymore. I should be a rapper.
Right. I should talk about this, and the way to talk about this is putting it on a beat. And I mean, and that is honestly what I think gave him his popularity. That was the beginning of his artistry, was his near-death story. And he's not the first rapper to have that.
Not at all, right? I mean, Tupac wasn't Tupac until he nearly died.
Right.
And then he came back out the hospital, and he came back with this like newfound like passion and energy and like anger, and that shit fueled the rest of his art the entire time. Like these near-death experiences, like Kanye, the whole idea of like nearly dying in a car crash gave us Kanye West.
Right. Through the wire.
And so it's weird, right? Because like hip hop is like an art form, just like any other art form, right? Just like any other music, but it's not, because it's the art of people who are always dying. It's the art of people who are always near death. It's the art of the people that have survived the worst of what it has to offer and has then chose to show, or share rather, with us. There's been a lot of that, unfortunately, the dying recently, right? So just last year, like, Mac Miller left us, rest in peace. We just did episodes on the blog era, and we mentioned Mac a couple times there. But I wanted to talk about Mac a little more here because, like, not only did it have a huge effect of that era, but him dying last year and seeing all the artists that were, affected by him show up, I think shows how much of an effect Mac had on the game.
Yeah, and I think also his death, I would say, is one of the most influential deaths, I think, as far as like our generation goes. Like a lot of the musicians that have passed away in the recent years, they have been, generations before us or kind of generations under us. Like I wouldn't associate XXX as a part of our generation.
Not at all.
But Mac Miller is, like we talked about in the last episode or on the blog era episode, he kind of defined a lot of our generation as far as like art is concerned. So for him to die, especially the way that he did, a way that was not surprising to any of us, a way that is very common when it comes not only to rappers, but like to musicians, period. And especially, just the climate that we're in right now with this whole opioid addiction and everyone being so concerned about overdoses in that kind of aspect. I think it pooled into something that became very, very influential. And I think his death was really, really important to all of us.
It's wild, right? Because, like, here's the thing. So Mac Miller dies, and we're all really sad. But if we start thinking about the reasons why we're sad, like how he died, why he died, etc., etc. But to go from his last album backwards, like to go back to Kids and to Faces and to come all the way back to Swimming, you see this person who has always kind of been near death. Like, when he talks about his drug use and his drug addiction and all the demons he faced, you can very clearly see who's contemplated death. He's had depression. He's gone through all that shit, and he's communicated that through his music, and he shared that with us. Mm-hmm. And that in itself makes the loss so much harder to bear.
Right.
Right? Because Swimming is this album that's like almost kind of moved past that. He's like, well, I have the shit that makes it hard to live, and I'm working through it. But I also have all the reasons that I'm working through all that shit. Mm-hmm. And he gave us that on Swimming, right? It's kind of like, here's this thing where I'm like, I'm a work in progress and I'm still doing well for myself.
Right, like this is not only who I am, but this is like who I hope to be. And for like kind of once I have an idea of what that is.
Exactly. And it's so different from Faces or Kids, which doesn't necessarily have an idea who that is, right?
Right.
Like, Faces is amazing. It's one of my favorite mixtapes of all time. I would argue it's one of the top 10 best mixtapes of all time. But what makes Faces so dope is it talks about, and like a lot of rappers have, like a long lineage of rappers have, but Mac makes an important contribution to the lineage of talking about depression, right? The Ghetto Boys talked about depression, Tupac talked about depression, lots of rappers have. I'm not saying to start in the blog era. I've seen that misconception in a lot of places. I want to put that to rest. But Mac makes an incredibly important contribution to that dialogue with that mixtape. And he gives us all his pain. And then on Kids, or like Best Day Ever, he does a complete 180 and takes us all the way away from it. And so Mac Miller has been giving us all of him for years now. And to have him leave us, to have him like ripped away from us way too early, like when he just gave us something, I think that was a complete view of him, not just one side of him, is what made Mac's death hardest for me.
Right. It left you feeling just very empty, right? And I think one of the feelings that I had for Max so much was that I was hopeful for him. I was hopeful for his career. Swimming was one of those albums I was like putting everyone onto. Like, if you haven't listened to this, because didn't it come out the same weekend as something else like immensely popular?
Like 15 things,
yeah,
right?
Like, and I remember, just because all this music likes to be released on Friday and then people have to pick and choose about what they want to consume first, and they end up consuming what's the most talked about, aka the more popular, usually not what's the best art or the better artist. And I feel like Mac was kind of falling into that category. So I was like, you need to listen to Swimming. Have you heard about it? Have you heard Thundercat's production on it? Like, he's about to go on tour with JID. Why is nobody paying attention to this man? Like, I was talking to my best friend about going to Mac Miller's tour, and the next day is when it was announced that he passed away. So he literally passed away the day that we were talking about going to his tour, but it was announced the next morning.
And it was a lot, I think, to deal with. And I think the way hip-hop dealt with it actually showed a way that we're progressing.
For sure.
As a genre, right?
For
Because
sure.
everyone came together. Vince Staples has his arm around his mother at this memorial service. Like, all these artists shows up. All these artists, like, show support. and like talk about sort of what he was going through and what they
Mm-hmm.
what he meant to them and what he meant to the game and how important he was. And it was a very like unifying moment in hip hop.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something really to speak to. And I mean, I don't want to feed into that stereotype that like everyone is against each other. Like I think is kind of made to be like in hip hop, like niggas don't have friends in this industry. Of course, there is unity within hip hop, but I think what was really important for not only the amount of artists that were showing love for Mac Miller and were showing like remorse and support for him, but like the range of artists.
Exactly.
You know, from like beginning people that you probably haven't even fucking heard of or don't even have like a debut album out, but were like, this man was producing half of it though. Even JID, didn't he say that Mac Miller was producing like half of my album?
And JID at the time, he isn't as big as he is now, like when Mac Miller died,
exactly,
right?
Right.
Like he wasn't an unknown, but he certainly wasn't a known quantity, right?
No, not at all. So from somebody like JID to be like, this man like literally changed my life. He influenced my music. Like, you know, he did that for me. And then to Jay-Z.
All the way to Jay.
All the way to Jay-Z.
All the way to Jay.
You know, who had shouted him out before. So this isn't just, again, one of those moments where an artist is starting to get praised more after their death. Because that happens a lot. I think that happens a lot in hip-hop.
Totally.
But Mac wasn't that person, you know, I think, and that's what was so important about the things that people were saying, artists were saying about him was just like, it was just like a RIP. It was like a paragraph story. I remember seeing like SZA's post, Vince Staples post, like a list of people that I think, again, our generation really look up to, talking about how this white rapper, who I think people really still overlooked, which was crazy to me. Like, no, pay attention. This isn't just another like overdose story. Like this man meant something to majority of people. So even if he didn't mean something to you specifically, he probably again meant something to your favorite artist.
So I think there's a couple points that you made there that I think I want to talk about. The first that Mac Miller was overlooked. I think Mac Miller is special, right? As especially as a white artist in hip hop, and I say this as a brown man in a black space, right? I am Bengali. For those who don't know, like I am not black. I think Mac Miller is a good example of the way you don't take up space against people, right? One of the common criticisms that's levied against other large white artists like Eminem or Macklemore is that they take up a lot of space. They don't necessarily allow for other people to get on, like that they're only on because they're white. Mm. You did not hear that against Mac Miller very often or ever. Like I personally, I'm sure someone has said it to him before, but never publicly, never like I never see people dissing him like that, even when he was like doing his own thing. Mm. He did his own thing and he did it in a way where he tried to uplift everyone else. Right. And I think that's really important to Mac's legacy because he is white, right? Because race affects everything. Whether we like it or not, race affects everything, especially in this genre, right? Mm. This genre that was birthed out of like basically revolutionary black people trying to like enjoy themselves, right? So that I think is really important. The fact that like, yeah, he was overlooked, but he also didn't necessarily always want to have the shine. He wanted to also give the shine and share the shine. He was also very self-aware of his place, like, and where he was in the game and what he did.
Easy Mac with the cheesy raps.
Yeah, real.
Who the fuck is Mac Miller?
And that shit is important. Mm-hmm. And to the other point that you brought up that I wanted to bring up is sort of how hip hop and unity and like how there is unity in hip hop, but Mac brought together a wide range of artists. Mm-hmm. I think oftentimes you have lots of unity in hip hop between certain cliques and camps,
right?
But like you don't necessarily have that range. Like the underground doesn't usually talk to the mainstream, and the mainstream doesn't usually talk to the hipster rappers, and the hipster rappers think they're better than the trap rappers, and like you know there's all these little cliques in rap now, especially we call them subgenres, whatever. This was one time where it didn't matter, and that. Like you were highlighting is so important. That is, I think, the unity we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So you have someone like Mac who died recently and who brought everyone together. But in hip hop, you have like all sides of the spectrum because then you go to the other side. You have someone like XXX, XXXTentacion who died and sort of kind of like not ripped like a veil because like, he wasn't necessarily big enough to do that, but like definitely like sort of had some discord in the way hip hop approaches death. Now, before like we talk about XXX, I would like to say a couple of things. We all respect the dead because we don't know what happens after you die. And it's better to respect death and better to respect what's on the other side, especially when you don't know what's coming. With that said, even with that respect, you can still have an objective conversation about someone who's dead after they've died about the things that they've done.
Without a doubt.
You can still criticize them without being disrespectful. You can still have that in them. I think a lot of people are like, oh, don't talk about the dead bad. Don't talk about the dead
Don't
bad.
disrespect the dead.
And it's like, no, we are not disrespecting this person's legacy. We're analyzing what they did, what they showed us.
Exactly.
And this is what they've left us to have, right? People work really hard on their legacies. Some people work super hard to make sure what they have left is good for generations. And if you don't necessarily put in that work, you don't necessarily get the same amount of reverence. And that's okay. So keep that in mind before you come at someone with you disrespecting them dead. Triple X is a really weird case. Here's why. He did something objectively horrible. And anyone who disagrees with that is an idiot, right? He did something objectively horrible. He put his hands on a woman, and there's no doubt that he did it. It went to trial, and people are like, oh, well, the trial got dropped. Yeah, she had to drop because all his fans started attacking her too, right? You can look into that too. That's all public information. So he did something objectively horrible. However, he made a contribution to hip hop, specifically the generation under us. When I say under us, I mean the 20-somethings.
Right.
If you've been to any high school, any middle school, if you work with children in any capacity, you can see the effect that Triple X had, especially when he died.
Oh my gosh.
And to disrespect that is to disrespect the growth process of millions of kids who are growing up now. So we talked about the blog era just last week, right? And we talked about how important Cudi was for our development. We talked about Mac and how important he was for our development. Triple X is a lot of that for these kids today. Because Triple X came at the right time, he said the right words, and said it in the right language. So much of hip-hop is language-based, right? It's this esoteric, coded language that changes from generation to generation. Some things stay, solid throughout, but most things change. And so if you don't speak the language of today, you can't necessarily be popular with the youth of today. You can't talk to them.
There's lack of connection.
Precisely. Rakim's not talking to somebody born in 2002.
Nor is he trying to.
And nor should he, right?
Right.
Because he's not going through that same mental process. He's not maturing in that way. There's a time and place that art is made, and that time and place matters. So Triple X made art for today, for kids to today, and they connected to it. And to be yeah, nah, fuck that. He's terrible. He's canceled. We're going to forget all about him. That's kind of weird, right? Because it's okay to acknowledge that someone did something objectively wrong, that they're a trash person, that you don't necessarily have to support them, with still acknowledging yo, there's this large conglomerate of people that fuck with him, that it changed them, that did something. Sometimes art exists outside of the artist's control. The damage has already been done, right? Triple X has already done something bad, but he's also already done the thing where he's enriched lives of the youth. For a lot of people, he talked about anger and depression in a way that they hadn't necessarily heard before, in a way that they hadn't necessarily been able to communicate before. Mm-hmm. Right? A lot of high schoolers, they go through 10th and 11th grade real angry, real pissed off. They do. Mm-hmm. And I can say this as someone who went through 10th and 11th grade real angry. And they don't know how to talk about it. They don't have words for it. So they just fight. They just do shit. Triple X was a great mouthpiece for that shit.
And let's act like we didn't have artists that did exactly that. And I mean, we touched on Kid Cudi and stuff like that. I think in Mac Miller, I think that more is on the the leading side of substance abuse. But we had rappers influential in our generation that were just as angry. Eminem being the perfect example.
Eminem is a great example of that.
Very aggressive and very quote unquote violent in his lyrics.
Definitely, for sure, right? And the difference is you'll say, well, Triple X actually hit somebody. All right, bet.
Valid.
So are you holding Nas to the same standard?
Are we?
Because Nas gave us the greatest hip-hop album all the time in Illmatic, right? But Khalees has no reason to lie about Nas hitting her.
Especially when admitting that she herself was abusive in the relationship also. She wasn't blaming one person. She was saying it was both sides. It was two-sided.
So if we're holding everyone to the same standard, and we're saying Nas is a trash person, which we should, because if he actually hit the mother of his child, that is not good. And we're also not saying, oh, Khalees is an angel, because if it happened both ways, it happened both ways. Both of y'all can be bad in a relationship.
Right.
Both of y'all can do the wrong thing. That's fine. Nas is a bad person. He also gave us arguably the greatest hip-hop album of all time in Illmatic. How do you balance the two, especially in death? right? And that's sort of the hard part of the conversation when it comes to hip hop and death. Because we glorify the dead so much as a genre, and because the genre itself is so conscious of death and always thinking about death and always sort of moving towards or away from death, it's really, really hard to have these conversations. And I'm not saying necessarily Brie and I have all the right answers. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Feel free to put it in the comments and argue with us. But I think when it comes to this shit, when it comes to like Triple X and Mac Miller, like both very recently dying, and the ways they died being so different, but both so close to the essence of what hip hop is and how it came about, it's really almost like overwhelming that all that shit happened.
Yeah.
But then you look back at all like the great artists that we've had that died, like Dilla, like, you know, Pac, Biggie, all these people, yo. Like what artists would you bring back if you could bring someone back?
Hip hop specifically?
I mean, that's not necessarily.
I mean, yikes. I mean, actually, one of the comparisons that I wanted to make earlier when we were discussing Mac Miller, one thing that I kind of touched on was like the hopefulness that we had not only for him, but I think there was a amount of hope that was reflected in his album and Swimming also. Like I know I'm fucked up, but I'm wanting to get better. And I remember like finishing that album, like damn, like I can't wait to see what he does after that. The last artist and I feel like that was taken away from me. The last artist that I felt that with was Amy Winehouse. Like I felt that exact same way with Amy Winehouse. I was so hopeful for what she was going to do. Like, yes, Back to Black was amazing. It was fucking phenomenal. She finally won her Grammy, all that shit. But at the same time, she was trying to get clean. She was finally getting rid of her shitty ex-boyfriend that got her hooked on drugs in the first place. Like there was a level of hopefulness that like her fans or stans had for her. Like I can't wait to see what she does next. And I felt that exact same way about Mac Miller. So Amy, for sure, would be somebody that I would bring back.
It's interesting because she had a really close relationship with Nas as well, right?
Very, very
And they
close.
made amazing music together.
Mm-hmm. And had apparently worked on a whole bunch more that hopefully will see the light of day.
Hopefully, we'll see. But Amy is a hip-hop artist, in my opinion. In the way she, like, dealt with a lot of her sort of problems, and the way she, like, gave us her soul, and the way she did that.
Her musical influences, and the people that she influenced also. Let's talk about Mos Def as well.
And people that she worked with. We keep dancing around the fact that we're both huge Mos Def stans, and one day we're going to have to address.
I feel like I mention Mos Def in every single episode, and that's, like, phenomenal, actually.
We're going to have to address that Black on Both Sides is one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time.
Yeah, Mos is definitely going to get his own episode.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
For sure. But it's interesting, right? Because, like, Mos is from Brooklyn. And Mos always, like, he has some reverence for Biggie as well, right? So speaking of the dead, and that's what we're doing, like, Biggie and Pac in itself is a whole can of worms that I think has, I guess, been examined a lot, but at the same time has almost been forgotten by the new generation. I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily know who Pac or Big was and their relevance to, like, what they did and how they changed hip-hop. And a lot of the conversations that we're having about death today in hip-hop, whether it's Lord Scooter dying or Dilla dying or Lil Snoop, like, a lot of that is shaped because of the way we dealt with Pac and Big dying, right? A lot of that, especially Lord Scooter on all of Baltimore, right? Like, the way Pac died, like, the fact that it was violent, the fact that the way Big died is violent, shapes the way we as a hip-hop community deal with death. That instance of, like, yo, this is violence, this is hyper-competitive, this is rap for real, like, that brought us to the edge of, like, hip-hop imploding. And then they died, these two, like, monumental figures, and then we sort of receded and we're like, all right, let's take a step back and sort of relax this shit out. Like, thankfully, shit has never gotten that hot again, and they serve as, like, the reminders to us that we should never let, you know, shit get this hot. Because that was tragic. Like, Tupac is so... All right, I'm a Tupac stan, right?
Yeah, that's good disclaimer.
Yeah, I'm a Tupac stan. Like, if anything, like, Tupac to me, like, embodies the whole idea of being, like, the man, the myth, the legend, right? Like the thing is, like, Pac in his own voice, just the cadence and tone and passion in his voice alone. Forget the words. Just those are enough to, like, make someone revolutionary. When you, like, pair it with his message, like, it's so easy to understand, like, one of his, like, most famous quotes, and I'm going to quote him because, like, I think it's important that this quote get repeated because Cole uses it a lot. Cole references this quote a lot. J. Cole, by the way. Every time I speak, I want the truth to come out. I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world, and I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee I will spark the brain that will change the world. I don't know who will change it, but I don't know how to change it right now. But if I keep talking about how dirty it is, somebody gonna clean it up. That shit, like, before Pac died, like, him saying that kind of shit, him, like, sort of building that foundation is how you get Kendrick and how you get Cole and how you get all these rappers that you love today, right? Literally on the backs and on the shoulders of these giants who have passed away. And so I think when we talk about death and we talk about hip-hop, we'd, like, be remiss not to bring up Pac and Big, who, like, is almost not single-handedly, but is one of the biggest single factors in creating Jay, right? Who's arguably the GOAT. Like, right. I would say Jay is probably the GOAT. He's been around the game for 20 years. He's got classic albums. He married Beyonce. Like, pretty much. Like,
enough said.
Yeah, he's pretty much the GOAT, right? And he will always show reverence to Big.
Always. One of the very few people at this point that he still
shows reverence to, right? And all your hip-hop billionaires do. Puff does. Jay does, Dre does. It's wild. So the way, like, hip hop interacts with its dead is wild. It's like, how at the one hand can we always be so reverent of these people that have died in all these situations, but on the other hand we're always so hypercritical of each other, and, like, we're always threatening to kill and shoot and do what it takes to, like, you know, get up on one another.
Yeah, that's what's amazing to me, is that we are able to, like, look at these rappers that have passed away with such, like, remorse, and then still glorify this level of, like, violence, and still glorify death in the same way.
Precisely, right? And same thing with drugs, right? We are real sad that Mac Miller died because of a drug overdose. We still love lean. Like, as a genre, we still love lean.
Right. How many rappers at this point have overdosed on Xanax, or at least admitted to having Xanax addictions that have kind of either ruined their life or their career? Chance the Rapper, Isaiah Rashad. Niggas still on Xans too.
Fuck it. Look at Future. We're watching a man, like, literally, like, tear himself apart while, like, taking advantage of the music. Right? And it's like, Pimp C. It's all good, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Pimp C. R.I.P., right? Underground King. Like, part of Houston culture is to put that lean in your cup, and
without a doubt. And I mean, and yeah, and it still is. I mean, I would say, of all the places that I'm lived, I'm the most connected to Texas still. And I mean, yeah, it's still something that is glorified. And it's just wild to me how it expanded out of Texas in the first place. And that was by way of hip hop music. That was by way of these artists that now
by way
have
of
passed. Yeah. By these artists that have now passed away, Pimp C on it, and still pouring. It's interesting.
But the thing is, like, that interesting sort of, like, I guess, like, that's like a hypocrite or whatever. Like, what do they call that? Like, it's a paradox. Like, you know, you killing yourself, like the snake's eating its tail. But at the same time, that is how hip-hop has always existed. Right? Hip-hop has always existed as a genre of contradictions. The hood itself has always existed as a place of contradictions. Mm-hmm. Like, there is a church and liquor store on every corner. Mm-hmm. Those are the two things. Like, you can choose life or death, like, literally in front of you all the time. And so that is what hip-hop comes from, and that is what hip-hop lives with.
Yeah, and I still think, and like you kind of mentioned earlier, I think that all just kind of boils down to blackness. I don't know why when you said there's, like, a liquor store and there's a church on every corner, I'm just like, that's just being black.
No, that's what, I mean, for a lot of people, yeah. Like, and this is separate from, I guess, like, the nicer black middle class that exists in certain places, right? Because, like, there's different types, I guess.
Right, yeah. I still think it's the same. It's presented differently.
Yeah.
It's not a liquor store and a church. I don't know. It's a 3-car garage or a 2-car garage.
Yeah, no, it's you keeping up with the Joneses is real, right? Mm-hmm. And it has a lot to do with the black experience. And I'm not gonna sit here and wax poetic about the black experience. I can wax poetic about, like, the hood, but even then, like, it's a whole nother world. It's a whole other world, and that is the world that sort of has created itself in this genre of music that we love and that has curated us as we've grown up. Death and myself have, like, an interesting relationship. Like, myself, like, I know before I turned 21, I knew 21 people that died under the age of 21, right? It's a startling stat that, like, I, like, discovered about myself as, like, I'm going over the names in my head and thinking about shit to myself. And I'm thinking about, like, why I like Pac so much and why I like Big so much and why I like artists that speak about death so much. And it's because, like, even when you're close or adjacent to these places, like, you experience so much of it. And they can talk about how the finality of this thing even though it's like hypocritical to be like, yeah, I'm gonna shoot you up, but at the same time, like, go to the guy's funeral that you said you were gonna shoot up, even if that's what you, they shot him up. Like, they can talk about that sort of like paradox, and they can understand it, and they can present it to you and make sense of it all. Hip hop makes sense of death and sense of the way that we die and the way that we needlessly die and the way that we seemingly aimlessly die. But it gives us sort of a path to understand it and a path to cope with it and a path to comprehend it. It's a way to understand that pain. It's a way to understand that ever like the sort of like the ever presence of death in all our lives. So I'm not sure.
Who would you bring back?
Who would I bring back?
Mm-hmm.
Man, I don't know. I'm not one to say what, open up a case to God is closed, but I would really enjoy like Pac as like as sort of a figure to guide people.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I would love to see where Tupac. I think he's who I would bring back just because I would want to see what I think out of many of the dead artists that we mentioned. I would like to see where Tupac kind of took his career. Kind of like how we were talking about Doom, which can't wait for that episode to come out. Like,
yeah, it's gonna be dope.
like, what is he going to, like, after he gets tired of rap, after he's over hip hop, like, how would he expand, or what else could he do? I like thinking about that with Tupac, because I mean, yeah, we saw him getting into acting and stuff like that, but I completely see him being comparable to Jay-Z, if not bigger, like a mogul or whatever.
And he might, I don't know. No,
or the opposite.
And we don't know.
Turn into a Bob Marley.
But that's what we say. Like, with cases that God has closed, sometimes they are closed. So, I think that kind of wraps up our death conversation in a lot of ways. Unless you have another point you wanted to bring up about it.
No, man. I
did want to do some RIPs.
Yeah, please.
So I wanted to like RIP Aaliyah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Aaliyah because she. So, not even within the context of hip hop, just personally, what Aaliyah meant to me. So, Aaliyah is my favorite R&B artist of all time because my mom used to play her first album for me a lot when I was little. She used to play it to like calm me down and stuff because that's what she liked. For reference, my mom is a short Bengali woman and moved to the States, I want to say, in like 89. So, she just adapted whatever her neighbors liked. She's like, well, my neighbors seem to like this, and so therefore I like Aaliyah. She had never heard like hip hop music or anything like that. So her two favorite hip hop artists are Lauryn Hill and Aaliyah.
Nice.
And like that's kind of like her range. She's like, I like those two. Yeah, those two I know. And so I think what Aaliyah did for a lot of people, and myself included, is like she was this angelic like presence, like the whole baby girl thing, like being someone who's just like, yeah, I'm cool, I'm good. And like she morphed into like more of a woman's woman, more of like a Rihanna figure, I want to say, towards the end. But that progression, I think, was the blueprint for a lot of like really dope R&B artists today. So R.I.P. Aaliyah, R.I.P. Dilla, of course.
I would like to counter that real quick. It's somebody that I wanted to mention who I didn't mention at all, and I'm completely regretful of that, is Left Eye.
Oh, shit. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I mean, this isn't a game of comparisons or anything like that. But I always saw Left Eye as one of the most influential female artists in my life, period. And I always felt a twinge of like, when everybody would, I feel like, glorify Aaliyah and put her on this kind of pedestal. Not saying she didn't deserve to be there, but just as far as artistry goes in general, I feel like Left Eye is one of the most influential female artists / musicians in the world. And I think it's more important when a person is subtly kind of, I don't know the word for it, not mocked, but kind of subtly, what's the word? Imitated, yeah. Or whatever, rather than like, everybody walks out here with like straight hair, side bang, red lip, baggy pants, and you're fucking Aaliyah. You know what I'm saying? And I don't feel like that's subtle at all. People legit dress up as Aaliyah for Halloween. But I think it's interesting to see there's certain nuances in certain like music videos or certain hairstyles, like even Rico Nasty's hairstyle in the new music video that she dropped with Doja Cat. I was like, it obviously was supposed to like be a reminiscent of like Babs and stuff like that. But I was like, that hairstyle looks like Left Eye. Only person I really see emulate her visually, I guess, or aesthetically would be Rico, which I think is really, really interesting.
Well, the Left Eye had some of the greatest verses. Like,
oh my God, no, she's one of the best artists of all time. And you can, music aside, I mean, she wrote most of the music for TLC. She was the director or the creative director for most of basically all of their influential videos for TLC, which is why you saw them like completely decline after her passing away.
In Something Wicked Comes This Way, which is the song with Andre 3000. So just if y'all don't know, Andre 3000 was killing guest features for like 20 years now. It's kind of amazing.
Favorite rapper ever.
Because like he killed a guest verse with James Blake like 2 months ago, and then I went back and listened to Something Wicked Comes This Way off TLC's Red Light special, and you're like, holy shit, this man just doesn't miss. But in any case, like over the course of my entire life, but going back to Left Eye and sort of all she did for the group, it's like you can hear her influence throughout the entirety of the album, right? The group is a lot of ways
is her. And I respected how she allowed, I think, both of her bandmates at either time to kind of like take the forefront, take the kind of spotlight, when honestly she's the one that deserved it. I think she's one of the main people I kind of think about when I think about my career. Like, I want to do all the lit shit. I want to do all the amazing things. I never want to be boxed into doing one thing or be known for doing one thing, but I never want to be the nigga in the spotlight. And if that's something that I can avoid, and if anything, like push somebody else who wants to be there in that, while I just kind of do all the lit shit and kind of fuel their artistry, I would be so happy with that.
The other dope thing about Left Eye, like you pointed out, and like, yeah, shout outs to you, Bria, for doing that in general. But the other thing about Left Eye in particular that I always liked is that when you think of like female rappers and like yada, which is a bullshit category, rappers are rappers are rappers.
Okay.
You know, she often is underrated because you bring up Queen Latifah, you bring up Missy Elliott, yada yada yada. Like, people don't necessarily mention Left Eye.
They do not.
But sneakily, like, she is probably the second best female rapper of all time. Like, Queen Latifah, I have as my number one, and I mean, you and ITY, I can't. But like, sneakily, like, her verses are just so good.
The bitch had bars.
Yeah.
What? And I mean, she was a songwriter on top of all this shit.
The reason I say sneakily though is because she was in a group. She was in a whole ass hip hop group. Okay. Right? Like, so it's wild.
And one thing, and I think one of the most influential things about her, and I think it really reflects like kind of what we've talked about throughout this episode, is I think she's one of the first artists to really, really predict her death.
Yeah.
She was very aware of her mortality and was like, it's ending. Let me get as much out as I can. And then lo and behold, she like literally, like, she actually fucking died.
It goes right back to the point that hip hop always produces prophecies about death, right? They're hyper aware of their own death. Right. All of us, all hip hop artists, like they are hyper aware, and she does, and she knew that shit.
Man, if you want something to watch, you're going to be really, really fucking sad. But her documentary is phenomenal. I watch it the anniversary of her death every single year. Yeah, actually.
I wanted to do a RIP to Phife Dawg because if you don't know where to start with the Tribe Called Quest, obviously Midnight Marauders and whatever, the albums are great. But if you need like something else, like there's an amazing documentary that went with Thank You for Your Service, We'll Take It From Here. Mm-hmm. And then there's also a book by a poet from Ohio named Hanif Akirab, and he just released it. It's a book on a Tribe Called Quest. I would start there. Because a lot of people don't necessarily listen to him anymore. We always said RIP PMC, of course. RIP ASAP Yams, because without him,
Big Yams,
we would not have ASAP Mob, we would not have Ferv, we would not have any of them. He was curating that Tumblr shit. He was a fucking Tumblr god.
He was.
Like, know your shit. All that shit you think is cute now, like all like the face tattoos and everything.
Yams.
Y'all better thank Yams.
Aesthetic. I would say Yams coined aesthetic.
Yeah. Y'all better thank Yams, goddammit. RIP Nate Dogg.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. The hook god. Y'all like Ty Dolla $igns a lot, and I like Ty Dolla $igns a lot too. This is not necessarily a comparison, but I'm saying you don't get him without Nate first.
Dogg. What? Okay.
Yeah.
This is why your hair may run.
Yeah. RIP ODB, because, Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to fuck with. If you don't know who ODB is, if you like all your little weird rappers, he was the first weird rapper.
Do your Googles,
yeah.
Right.
If you like out there shit, for sure. RIP Guru Gangstar. He was a classic group with DJ Premier. Like again, do your Googles, but like this is some real like classic like New York, bounce with it, hip hop shit. R.I.P. Big L. That's another dude that has a complicated ass legacy. Mm. So I was earlier talking about like Triple X and sort of like his like legacy of like bringing anger. Big L, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, is a perfect portrayal of the hood at that time. Like, if you listen to that album, like, you'll understand how angry that place was. And you'll understand how angry Big L is. And that shit is kind of hard to deal with sometimes. Like, you be driving in your car and, like, you really listen to his lyrics, you're like, this motherfucker needs to kill somebody. Mm-hmm. Like, he needs to. Like, he
needs to.
Nah, you don't understand. Like, it's in his voice. Like, if you listen to Big L, like, that's how hard his shit was, right? Yeah. Like, it was, like, beyond what you think is hard today. Mm. That shit was there. So, like, I feel like he was someone who understood exactly what I was talking about earlier when he was like, yeah, death is ever present, and it's sort of this weird paradoxical thing where it makes you angry that death is always so close and puts you always on edge and always stresses you out, and it's always there and like makes you uncomfortable. Big L is someone that like takes that and like here's like, okay, here's that in rhymes, which, you know, not a lot of people can do. So R.I.P. Big L. You know, I lived in Baltimore for a while. I lived over by the Village. I lived over west. So R.I.P. Little Scooter. R.I.P. Little Snoop. R.I.P. everybody in Baltimore for real. What it is, dummy. And
what it is. Oh my God.
What it is, dummy. But nah. And I mean, I feel like I mentioned everybody I need to mention. You got anybody else you need to shout out?
I mean, I wish I would have had more time to prepare and shit. I wasn't thinking about this at all. I mean, I think I mentioned who really mattered to me. R.I.P. Left Eye forever. R.I.P. Mac forever. R.I.P. Fife forever. Yeah. R.I.P. Pimp C. Shout out to Texas. Oh, God. I mean, an R.I.P. to everybody adjacent that has influenced hip-hop. Amy Winehouse to Nina Simone. Her birthday just passed. And then just...
Yeah, it did.
R.I.P. to all of y'all.
And thank you.
Thank you. No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Left Eye. I can't wait to tell you that in person. But yeah, that's all I have.
So do you have a visual recommendation for them? Maybe one of like Left Eye's more famous videos that you think she directed?
Oh my gosh.
Just for this week. Just like, because like, you know, a lot of people aren't hip necessarily. A lot of people, or maybe even if they are hip, they haven't necessarily watched shit in a long time. So like while you do that, I'm going to recommend some of the obvious choices for like my music recommendations. I'm going to say if you want a complete album to listen to front to back, no skippables, Ready to Die by Biggie. And if you need to understand sort of what we're talking about when it comes to Mac, I would start with Faces and then listen to Kids and understand the juxtaposition between the two. Oh, in R.I.P. Prodigy, Mobb Deep. Yes. Someone incredibly important to hip-hop. Fuck that. If you need a hard-ass rapper album to listen to this week, listen to The Infamous. And you'll understand why Prodigy is so important. You got what you got?
I mean, I was just trying to think of my favorite TLC video, and honestly, I couldn't come to an answer. I mean, I would just start with TLC. Watch, if you can find the earliest music video to their last, and the last one being the ones that they released without Left Eye, just watch that progression. I've actually done that before when I was going through my weird little depressive state, and I think probably during the anniversary of her death, and I was watching all of the videos and like just trying to pinpoint all of her influences. And one thing I really appreciate about YouTube is every now and then a lot of like behind the scenes footage of shit just pops up on YouTube. TLC has a lot. Left Eye has a lot. A lot of that B-roll and stuff is a part of the documentary as well. And the documentary does a great job of summarizing her influence.
So it's fair to say you recommend the documentary.
I'd recommend the documentary, but I mean, if you want to watch a music video, definitely watch Red Light Special. That was a hit. And No Scrubs. I think No Scrubs is a very, very good summation of like her. And even like, especially her verse. I think she reflects some of her immortality in that verse. But yeah, that's somewhere to start.
With that said, rest in peace to everyone we mentioned today and the people that we missed. May God have blessings on you all, or whoever it is that you pray to. Thank you for listening as usual.
Thanks, man.
Peace and love.
See you later.